18 argument. As for the hypothetical, right now I'm having to do to write descriptive summaries for the whole book of Revelation, and so I'm in the 7 letters. I just did those, and when you're reading those, you see that they are guilty of syncretism. When you see the story of Exodus, they're worshiping the golden calf. They're doing those things like that, and yeah, I don't think atheism. I mean, yeah, philosophically, it's been around, but
Didn't God kill a
was
bunch of people?
was it around? Was it around whenever? I mean, when did atheism first come on the scene? I mean, it wasn't. It was always the tendency was to look at creation and worship creation, or gods or whatever, rather than to be atheist. So I think in a way that's a newer thing. Yeah, I know it's been around since like the Roman Empire and maybe the Greeks and stuff like that, but I'm just saying there's a little bit different situation there. However, what I will say is I really hold to that passage that says when we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself, because that is an example of how those 3 tenses of salvation or 3 aspects of sanctification work out, because the first part of that uh, couplet or whatever
What verse
is
is that? He is faithful, but even if we're not thing, I want to pull that up if we can.
It's
But sorry, go ahead.
2 Timothy 2, I think.
If you want to pull it up, Jamie, I can share your screen as Charles is.
Or can I got it if I can share my screen.
I like to respond to Charles too.
Yeah, just let's throw that up when you're done. I think we should look at that, because I think the two sides take that verse exactly opposite from each
that
other.
would be a good passage to look at, actually.
I know how the other side takes it. But
actually, if I could jump in, Charles, and I want you to take as much time as you want. Let's all engage this passage a little bit, because hey, Charles, you can share screen. Okay. I just wanted to point out that let's engage this passage a little bit, because I think this is important, because if it really is saying that, if we believe not, he remains faithful because he cannot deny himself. If that really does apply to the person who does fall into unbelief towards not just the promises of God, but actually to salvation itself, then I think this makes or breaks it, right? So I think we should engage this text a little bit.
I think so.
Right? Yep. So, okay, so I'm going to put it up on screen, Charles. If you want to go over it, Jamie, I know you've discussed this a lot too, so we'll get your input, we'll get Praise's input, Smokey's, but we'll start with you, Charles, and then we'll move around the room.
Okay. I don't know how to switch this in Logos to turn it off, but I'm going to have to be stuck to this screen, so y'all just bear with me. This is the right screen, though. For if we died, okay? Died. We got to ask ourselves, what tense is that? What column does that go in? All right? I take it as positional. For if we died, which we did because he's our substitute, with him, we will also live with him. I take this as referring to ultimate category, okay? And so this is saying that if we meet the condition of dying with him, which we did, according to Romans 6, we're united with him. We buried, his death, burial, resurrection. That whole idea is there. A positional concept, it's there. And then we see this right here. If we endure, so this is experiential, okay? We will also reign with him. Now, this is an ultimate category, because this deals with ruling and reigning, and it deals with rewards and stuff. Okay, and it says if we deny him, well, this is still experiential, because it's talking about denying him in the sense of not serving with him, as Romans 8 talks about that we're joint heirs with Christ if we suffer. So that's conditional. So if we deny him, he will also deny us. This is the sense of not recognizing us before the Father and before the angels, lots of rewards in that sense. And then it says right here, if we are faithless, so this is experiential, he remains faithful. And yes, this is ambiguous, because it could mean he's faithful to his promises, which are both to keep you eternally secure and also to discipline us. But regardless of how you take this, it still doesn't reverse the fact that in 11, he's already established the condition by which you are eternally secure is you are now positionally dead, and therefore you can't be tried again. There's no double jeopardy. and therefore you will live with him. You will receive your glorified body. So that's all I'll say on that.
Yeah, I completely disagree with that exegesis, because I think this is actually alluding to some passages in the Old Testament where it says, if you forsake God, he will forsake you. But in Isaiah 1, it says, those that forsake the Lord, they will be consumed with the unbelievers. So I take a whole different stance on that. I think it's fine.
We can go to the Old Testament and talk about those passages too. I have no problem with that.
Yeah, I think these are actually alluding to those verses. Actually, it's just a different word. It's, instead of deny, it would be forsake. We just replace it. It's basically it's semantical range of meaning. So I think
So, are you saying, have you studied the Septuagint on those particular passages? Is there any type of allusion in this text right here that indicates that is the point of reference, that he wants us to call to mind that was the intended statement for the original audience?
You have logos. Let's see what some of the commentary.
All right. Well,
yeah, I'll pull it up. Hold on.
Yeah, go ahead, Charles. You can
respond. Take the screen sharing away from me. I don't know how to turn this. I'm used to using Zoom, and I can't turn this scribble thing off.
No worries. You're good. Down at the bottom where it says mute, start cam, and share, for you it should say like unshare or stop share or something like that.
Okay, I got it.
Can I ask a question to the OSAS side?
What verse was that real quick? That was
2 Timothy 2.
Okay, I totally forgot about that.
Now, when they were worshiping the golden calf, and then God ends up killing a bunch of them. And by the way, I think we know where some of their graves are in Saudi Arabia. But anyways, when God kills these people for being idolatrous worshippers of other gods, and he kills them, are they being taken home early, or are they receiving a reward that'll likely be paralleled to their eternal reward?
Yeah, go ahead,
I believe
Charles.
they're being taken home early. And I think it's Exodus 4:30. And whenever Moses proclaimed, it says they believed, and before they went through the Red Sea, it says they believed, which I believe that's national redemption, but individual redemption happened before that. And I would even argue that the Passover is not a picture of positional salvation, that was actually temporal salvation. I wrote a paper on it, but the short answer is, yeah, they were taken home. It's divine discipline.
So
yeah, similar to what we see in 1 Corinthians 11:30,
right? Because they're literally breaking the first and greatest commandment, and then they're also, it's like, does that mean the people in the flood?
Mosaic, any of the covenants did not have to do with salvation. The Suzerain and Vassal treaties all have to do with service, fellowship, and worship. So they're not salvation categories. There's content in them that which a person could evangelize by, or there may be soteriological benefits in them, but the covenants themselves are service categories based on a master service relationship.
Just sounds like a reward they're receiving for being taken. I mean, you worship another god and you're killed, and from your guys' view, it'd be going to heaven, being with.
Well, oftentimes in the Old Testament, Jamie, especially like, the first time somebody does something, then, God kills them. Whether they're saved or not, obviously not everybody within Israel is saved. And that's just to show us how serious certain sins are, but it doesn't mean that.
Sorry.
No. Go ahead, Jamie.
I was just going to say, I think probably the reason that some of the punishments seem so harsh so quickly is that we don't see today, let's say, is obviously because we're under grace and all that. But I do think it was always grace through faith that saved, even before the cross, just to be clear. But I think, absolutely. I also think, though, that I'm not a dispensationalist. I'm a covenant theologist. But I think that would be because they had the manifestation of God as their leader. And so, just in the same sort of position as the angels are in when they fell, right? Like, they have no chance of salvation because of their knowledge and understanding and what, the light they had. So likewise, in the Old Testament, the they had God as their leader. They saw manifestations of God and saw very powerful things. So I think that's probably why they were judged more harshly in that sense, and other reasons.
And even just to show us today just how serious these sins are. And actually, Truth Defenders here makes a good point. Ananias and Sapphira were slain by the Spirit. Never says they weren't believers or not. I mean, Paul would frequently hand over true believers to Satan for chastisement, for discipline, in order to hopefully bring them back into fellowship, in order to get them to hopefully repent of their false doctrine. We have examples of those whose faith was shipwrecked, right? We have these examples not of a loss of salvation, but just of a form of carnality where believers are falling into false doctrine and things that certainly need to be repented of. But what I want to do here, because I see Praise is screen sharing. Praise, take as much time as you want to respond to what you want. Then we're going to hand it over to Charles to also do the same. Charles, you can then take as much time as you want to respond. And you guys can engage each other a little bit. So go ahead, Praise, and then we'll hand it to Charles.
Cool. So the two Greek words are not directly related, but I think they have basically the same semantical range of meaning. So we call the LXX, or the Septuagint would use the word here in the Greek would be inkatolopo. I mean, somewhere near that. If I butchered that,
Lepo is from I fall. Or left.
Yeah. So if we go to 2 Timothy, well, I mean, I could look at the general the lexicon. They would define that as like to. Let's see here. I did pick the right one. Here we go. To leave, utterly forsake, and leave behind, remain, blah 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 blah, forsake, leave. I mean, that's basically the meaning of it. Now we go to 2 Timothy 2:13. Let's see here. I mean, it's still within that. It's still within that range, because deny, disregard, abnegate, abjure, refuse, reject, disavow. I mean, those to me are still in the same range. Maybe it's not a direct, like a direct association with that verse, or a direct correlation. But why not? Why isn't it implicitly part of that passage? Like, couldn't it also be tied in with that? I mean, why not? And I mean, if you can give arguments why it wouldn't, that'd be pretty cool.
Well,
and also,
I'm not really against what you're saying. I just wanted to know if there was a grammatical parallel in the Septuagint or whatever. But no, I have no problem with that. I think the question you would have to think about concerning this issue is how much of his audience, Timothy, probably the church of Ephesus or whatever, how much of Isaiah did they have in mind, and right. I have no problem believing that they have a whole fully developed Old Testament theology. I don't have a problem with that.
Right.
I think one of the issues, though, when you're coming to Isaiah right there, is it's about a reeve judgment. It's about covenant violation. You're dealing with the issue of the nation and you have faithful people in the nation, and you have unfaithful people in the nation, and then you got to deal with that. Not everybody of the nation were saved. I tend to usually think most people in the nation were saved, but you would actually have to trace throughout the periods of time. Like, for example, in the Exodus generation, I would say everyone was saved that came through the Red Sea, even the mixed multitude. I would say all them are saved. But as you're going through with the period of Judges, the 400 years, the decline and stuff like that, not all those people were saved. So you had a loss of the word during that time, a famine of the word, if you will, and not everybody was living the experience or sanctified. So so I have no doubt that they were abandoned in their covenant. They were unfaithful to that covenant, but that same covenant that they're being unfaithful to is the basis for why God promises restoration and stuff. Because you have several different covenants involved.
Actually, I was no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody say
So
something?
let me just finish it really quick, then you can go ahead.
Yes, sir.
So I would say to me, this is indicative of a final judgment because consume, like, is the consuming fire in Revelation. I mean, why would they use that type of language? I mean, why would to me, it's like you're making it super like specific to one generation. And I don't like I guess you could take it that way, but I mean, this is like finality type of verbiage being used here. Like to me, it's hard to get around that. But also, you made something about imperative with Jesus being discipleship. And I'm saying, well, of course, that actually proves our point is prescriptive because he asked us to love the Lord our God with all our heart, and all our mind, all our soul, and all our body. And that's an imperative as well. But do you think that's required for one to be a Christian, you know, or something like that? I would say no. I mean, because you can't force love because that, I mean, unless you're some type of hyper determinist, like a 5-point Calvinist, then of course, then I guess then you wouldn't take it that way. But I don't think you're a hyper Calvinist. So
no, any command in Scripture except for believe the gospel, I take is referring to discipleship, service, worship, fellowship, categories concerning that. I'm not saying there it's a proof of salvation or requirement of salvation.
Yeah, I mean, my point is though that there's a spectrum of possibilities. Though it's not something that we would say that is like a requirement or something that must happen to be a disciple. It's something that is prescribed. That is something that is, I think, yearned by God, or something that God would want us to accomplish. He's calling us to do that, but it doesn't mean that it's a requirement or something like that. That's my whole point.
Well, if I could ask Praise a real quick question, maybe get a quick answer. The carnal Corinthian Christians, were they saved?
Yes, according to the text, and yes, and even if it seems vague, I would say yes. I would say they were saved.
So it is then possible, especially because Paul said, while talking to the carnal Corinthian Christians, we know that they were into some pretty bad works of the flesh, prostitution, possibly incest, a lot of carnality, who knows? And Paul looked at them and said, we are going to be presented. We will be at the judgment seat of Christ, you know, and he pointed out how many of them, because of their carnality, many of them, their works with no eternal value will be burnt up, but they themselves will be saved. So would you agree then that it is possible for a carnal Christian who is involved in the sins that the carnal Corinthian Christians were in could still hypothetically be saved?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I would disagree with that. I would take the idea of a carnal Christian who's been ensnared to sin, serving sin, is a demonstration of the fact that they're not committed, that they're not actually of that spirit, you know, of the church, which is why I believe it was so essential to ostracize them. Otherwise, I think it would have been better to keep them around, to edify them, to get them to come back, you know, to it, as opposed to just, you know, pushing them out because their influence could be so toxic and dangerous. And now this is going back to 1 Corinthians 6, 9, and 10, you know, and it does say, I think in 1 Corinthians 5, hey, we all must appear, like all of us, like in a seemingly, to me, like in an inclusive sense of, like, you know, every person that lives will appear for judgment to God.
No, Smokey, I got to stop you there.
Can I respond to that though?
Well, I just have, because you know what, sure. Smokey, you know, you are just absolutely wrong on that, because there are two judges. I mean, are you saying?
I know there's two judgments, but I'm saying it's not absolutely all exclusive every single time it's referenced that way.
Well, the all here has to refer to believers because it's only believers that appear at the judgment seat of Christ.
Well, no,
so it's not all in the sense of unbelievers.
Well,
and
the
believers.
bema seat, so
Right.
like the seat for the giving of rewards. So we all must appear before the bema seat of Christ to receive in the body. But there is an idea in a general sense that every human that ever lives is going to be judged. So they will appear before judgment of the holy God. And the warning,
the great white throne judgment would be for unbelievers, though.
I think that's
we're not going to be present there. Yeah, go ahead, Veckel. Go ahead.
I think the confusion, though, is that we're not making a proper distinction between the ontological aspect of someone getting saved and the superficial aspect. I mean, with superficial, we're talking about what to do with individuals who profess to be of Christ, but yet they display things that are contrary to what's described. Things like Galatians 5:22, so on and so forth. So what we do with those individuals, we practice church discipline, so on and so forth. But that still doesn't necessarily determine whether or not they're one of God's elect. I mean, that's between that individual and God.
Well, Beckler, you're taking it to an absolutist sense of the elect in Calvinism. We're trying to keep it more on this like frame of reference that we can access, which is not knowing that.
Yeah, I know that, but we don't.
Let me say one thing:
to determine whether or not the person's saved or not from that point on. I mean, we don't just go around and say this person is saved because they don't hold to this particular doctrine or something like that. I mean, we can just ostracize them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they've lost their salvation or that they were never saved to begin with. All we know is that they're teaching false doctrine or they believe in false things.
Right. If I could say one thing and then I'll yield, I just want to exegete this real quick from my position. And I do believe, I agree with Praise, that the fact that the carnal Corinthian Christians were addressed by Paul in the sense that, hey, listen, you're saved, but yet you're acting like babes in Christ. He called them babes in Christ, not that they were. He said you're like babes in Christ, as in they've been saved for however many years, but they haven't grown, they haven't matured spiritually, which shows that you can be spiritually immature. Not every believer is spiritually mature. There are spiritually carnal believers, and that's why Paul says, and this is how I exegete it, wherefore we labor that whether present or absent, he's talking to the carnal Christians at Corinth, we may be accepted of them, for we must all appear. So he's assuming that even these carnal Corinthian Christians are going to appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive the things done in his body. The only reason he's saying that is because these carnal Christians, what are they doing? They're walking in the flesh. They're not walking in the spirit, obviously. And therefore he's pointing out that those things you're doing in the body, according to that he hath done, whether it be good or bad, carnal Christians are obviously doing bad, they're going to be judged and their works of no eternal value will be burnt up. So the fact that and I'll just read this and I'm done. The apostles' prophetic statement in verse 10 shows that all believers, we all, are everlastingly secure. Even the carnal Christians at Corinth were sure to appear at the judgment of the saved. So I don't see how you could say that it is not possible for a believer. And obviously this is unfortunate. This shouldn't be the case, but this is reality. I mean, this world is not just puppies and rainbows. The reality is a believer can unfortunately walk in the flesh and therefore be carnal. But Paul says you're still going to appear at the judgment seat of Christ, but get ready because your works are going to be burned. I yield. Go ahead.